Boy, you've been getting down and out about the liars and the dirty, dirty cheats of the world. You could have been getting down to this sick, sick beat. My man got his new girlfriend. She said, oh my God, I'm just gonna shake it to the beat over there with the hella good hair. What you gonna do, baby? Shake, shake, shake. Yeah. Shake, 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 shake.
All right, good evening, everyone. We're going to be getting started in about 30 seconds. We'll let some people go ahead and get finished signing in, and then we're going to go ahead and get started with the presentation. If you haven't already done so, please sign in, and then we'll get started. All right, Diane, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So let's go on to our first screen. Welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. Tonight, we are going to be taking a closer look at the executive function skills in the emotion bucket, which are the critical brain skills to nourish, flourish, and thrive. So I am Kelly Spino, and I am the Chief Organizational Learning Officer with the Children's Guild Alliance. So welcome this evening, and let's get started. All right, so a couple of housekeeping pieces before we get started. I want to let you know that the meeting is being recorded, and that if it's possible for you to be on video, please do so. But if by chance you have things going on in the background, or children coming in and out, or pets or whatever, and you need to be off camera, that is fine with us as well. We will be using the chat function this evening. So we will ask you to participate via chat. If you also have questions for us or comment, feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll get to those as soon as we can. During the presentation, I'll ask that you mute your audio. In the event that we ask for you to unmute, please do so. But in the meantime, it'll help keep some of the distraction down. And throughout the webinar tonight, we want you to be engaged. This is our learning opportunity to share ideas and thoughts. So we ask you to remain engaged and participate with us, to have this community mindset. We'll ask you to share your expertise and your talent with us, as well as us sharing ours with you. We ask you to speak your truth as we enter into the webinar tonight. And tonight it'll be about emotions. And then also, let's be open to new ideas. So with that being said, and housekeeping taken care of, let's get started. Our topic tonight is executive function emotion skills. Yes. So we're going to start right off this evening with a poll. And I want you to think about, what age group do you think is the most stressed? So go ahead and register your vote. Seems like we're a little bit all over the place here. I see somebody says the elderly, and I'm not even going to begin to imagine what that might mean, given my age. All right, so let's see. It looks like we are just about there. We'll give people a couple more seconds to fill it in. All right, so let's take a look at our results. It looks like based on the poll that the majority of people thought that between the ages of 12 to 17 was the most stressed. The second group would be the 18 to 23-year-olds. And then it looks like we have the 45 to 60 is just slightly more to 25 to 40. So let's take a look at what research says about the age group that is the most stressed. So what research says, oops, sorry about that, I can't see mine, is that the age group that is the most stressed is actually 18 to 23-year-olds. And if we think about what's happening in the lives of 18 to 23-year-olds, it's when they're leaving high school. Some of them may be going off to college, some of them may be going off to the military or a trade school. Some of them may be at home and not sure what they're going to do. But it's a time built with a tremendous amount of uncertainty and lots of options. And we're looking at an individual at this age who has yet to develop all of their frontal lobe or rational thinking skills. So what research says is that based on the 2020 data, if you're in that age bracket of 18 to 23, you are in the most stressed age category. So let's take a look at some of the other data about stress. So based on the data that's been collected, what we know is that about 33% of people report feeling extreme stress, not just once in a while, but extreme stress. 77% experience stress that affects their physical health. 73% says it impacts their mental health. And 48% of people say that they have trouble sleeping because they're just so stressed. But unfortunately, about half of all Americans, this level of stress is only getting worse instead of better. And we know that this last year was particularly stressful with the pandemic and the civil unrest, but life is stressful. And so when we looked at some of the symptoms associated with stress, this is kind of what the data shared with us, is that irritability and anger, kind of being on edge all the time, was about 45% of the participants. Fatigue or low energy was about 41%. Lack of motivation or interest in things, kind of that feeling of depression, 38%. Anxiety, nervousness, worrying, 36%. Headaches, 36%. Feeling sad or depressed, 34%. Then we get into some of the biological issues like indigestion, acid reflux, upset stomach, 26%. Muscle tension, 23%. And appetite changes either up or down, 21%. And these are just some of the common symptoms that are activated when we talk about this concept of stress. So when we talk about our executive functions, the bucket that we're going to talk about tonight is the emotion bucket. And within this bucket, we have emotion control and stress tolerance. And as we can see from some of the data, that these are essential to our well-being, not only our physical well-being, but also our mental health. So let's dive in and see what we can figure out about emotion control and stress tolerance. So we always begin with the brain. And so when we talk about the brain in the Institute, what we talk about is basically the structures that you see: the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the frontal lobes, corpus callosum, hippocampus, and the cerebellum. And one of the ways we talk about this is through this idea of icons. So when we're teaching children about the brain, we try to make it in easy, understandable ways so that they can begin to associate the structure and the function. So the hippocampus is one of the things that we talk about in terms of being able to carry memories. It's kind of like that mail carrier where he delivers mail from one port to the next. And so the hippocampus is kind of that same idea of delivering memories from one part of the brain to another. Our amygdala is much like that palace guard who's there to provide safety at all cost. And this is where we see that the amygdala's primary job is to be aware of fear and threats. And for the palace guard, it's for the palace. But for us, it's any kind of fear or threat to our well-being. Now, the hypothalamus is like that control you have, the thermostat in your house. So when it's too hot or too cold, you turn it up or you turn it down. And the hypothalamus, when the stress levels are too high, can turn up the hormones to help our bodies adjust. And we're going to break that down a little bit more tonight and figure out how that really does work. Our corpus callosum is like that Bay Bridge. It connects the right side of the brain to the left side of your brain so that we can get integration of both our logic and our emotional brain. And our cerebellum is allowed to make us move and shake. And then, of course, we have our frontal lobes, and that's the co-pilot, because this is where all of our executive functions are housed. And the reason it's a co-pilot is because our executive functions and our frontal lobes, they don't develop until we're much into our 20s. And so as a parent, you oftentimes act as the frontal lobe for the children that you work with as they navigate the challenges and struggles in life to come up with new meanings and new ways of survival. So that's the basic structure of the brain. Let's go a little bit deeper. So thankfully, our brains have superheroes. So when stress is on the forefront, knocking on our door, we have this superhero team that comes to the rescue and helps us combat stress. Let's figure out who's on that team. Well, we have the hypothalamus, which remember was our thermostat. We have a pituitary gland, which is something new, which we're going to talk about. Our adrenal gland, that amygdala, remember the palace guard who's watching for keeping us safe, and our prefrontal cortex, which is where our executive functions are housed. Now, 3 of these compose our stress response system. It's the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal gland. They work as a team, and that's the HPA team, and they're your superheroes when it comes to stress. So why do we need to do this? Well, when we have stress, what happens is the brain goes into action by speeding up your heart to increase the blood flow. It speeds up your breathing so that there's more oxygen, and it slows down that digestion so that you can store your fat and sugar for when you need that energy. So again, the purpose here is for the brain to be able to manage the stress in a healthy way, if possible. So let's take a look at how that happens. So it begins with the amygdala. Remember the palace guard? So the amygdala detects stress, and that stress could be one of 2 things. It can be an emotional stress, something that has evoked an emotion or a sensation within you, such as fear, or it could be a biological response, something like you're not feeling well, you're having pains in your chest, and all of a sudden the amygdala is going, we've got a problem. So immediately the stress response team goes into action. That hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands are ready for response. So the hypothalamus gets that signal from the amygdala that says, uh-oh, we have some kind of stress going on here. The hypothalamus then sends a signal to the pituitary gland to release hormones. The hormones typically associated with stress is going to be cortisol. So the adrenal glands release the cortisol into the bloodstream, which then prepares the body. So if the body needs to respond to fear or a threat, such as a bear chasing you down in the countryside, your body's going to be able to respond faster. It also helps the brain think clearly by sending energy to your muscles, your heart rate, and your breathing. So this chain of responses allows us to go from taking in any kind of a stimulus that says threat or fear, all the way to activating these glands in our body and releasing these hormones so we can move into action and provide safety at all costs. So there's this relationship that exists between the amygdala, that palace guard, the uh-oh guy, to the prefrontal cortex. So the amygdala sends this signal of threat to the prefrontal cortex. And within the prefrontal cortex are your executive function. This is where rational thought happens. And so what the prefrontal cortex has to do is say, hold on, amygdala, I got this one. We know how to deal with it. Settle down and stop secreting the cortisol. And so this relationship goes on back and forth all day long. So anytime there's any indication of stress, your amygdala immediately activates your systems, which then gets to the prefrontal cortex, who has to decide, what do we do? Do we know how to manage this? And if we do, let's calm that amygdala down. So it's a very unique relationship that happens between that amygdala and prefrontal cortex. So it's a kind of little dance that happens all day long in your brain. So now let's take a little bit of a different look at it. So here we have the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, and you can see that connection with that gray line. So the prefrontal cortex regulates that stress response by making things seem less scary, kind of calms it down. That amygdala detects things that are scary or dangerous, sends it to the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex says, we got this one. The hypothalamus then wakes up and says, wait a minute, we got a problem here. And it activates the pituitary gland, who then says, uh-oh, got to release that cortisol, got to make sure that we are able to respond and keep this person safe. So the hormones go to the pituitary, and then it goes into the release of the cortisol into your kidneys, your blood vessels, and it sends it through your body so that your body can respond to the stress in the most appropriate way. Pretty amazing. So when we talk about our executive functions, for those of you that have been with us, you know, we always compare it to a traffic control center that you would find at an airport. And if you look at this picture, everyone is engaged in watching the monitors and looking out their windows and making sure that they are managing the arrivals and the departures of planes all day long. Well, that's exactly what our executive functions do. They manage all the stimuli that come into our brain and try to determine how best to execute a task or an emotion or a behavior. So the executive functions enable us to plan, to focus our attention, remember instructions, juggle multiple tasks simultaneously, all while it's filtering out distractions. It's deciding, how are we going to prioritize? What are we paying attention to? What are we going to try to achieve today? And how do we control the impulse not to pay attention to something that's not a priority? And all of this happens within our executive functions, which are housed in that prefrontal cortex. So when we talk about our day-to-day activities of memory, focus, creativity, your abilities, your attention, these are basically what you do every single day. And it's what you need to do to get your work done. Well, that's your executive functions. And today, our focus is on the two that comprise the emotion bucket. And I will tell you, this is probably one of the most difficult, in my opinion, because there's a sense of vulnerability that comes with the emotion bucket. And there's a piece of self-reflection that has to occur for changes to happen. So I think this is probably one of the more challenging executive function skill sets to not only refine, but to help make sure that it's working at its optimum so you can be successful. So let's look at what's in that bucket again. We broke down the executive functions into these three buckets. And this is our executive skills placemat that not only identifies how we sort out the thinking skills, the doing skills, or our action skills, as well as our emotion skills, but we also describe what it means. What is the function? And so if you'd like a copy of this, it's available for you at the childrensguild.org website. So we encourage you to go ahead and download a copy of that for yourself, help you remember what exactly is going on with that executive function. So for tonight, though, we're looking at emotion. So the two areas we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about is emotional control and stress tolerance. So here's a time for you to start thinking about your own skills. So do you experience quick changes in your emotions? Kind of like that roller coaster sometimes? Do you feel self-conscious? Do you let a setback ruin your entire day? So one little thing and the whole day is shot? Do you worry constantly about everything? Do you have mood swings? Or do you have outbursts that are intense, emotional outbursts that could be laughter or crying or yelling or screaming? Well, if any of this sounds like you, then you might be having some difficulty with emotional control. And probably we can see ourselves somewhere in there. So Nicole, thank you for your honesty. I appreciate it. So let's figure out now, if we do have difficulty with emotional control, what do we do about it? Well, let's first figure out what we're talking about here. So emotional control is your ability to manage your emotions to achieve and complete tasks or control and direct your behavior. So in other words, given any situation, how are you able to manage your emotions to keep moving forward until completion? So even if you're anxious, you remain calm and you don't let that get in the way of finishing. You don't let frustration take over. So if you're trying to do a new task and you don't get it right, and we know the brain doesn't get it right the first time, it needs repeated rehearsals. Are you able to stay calm enough to persevere? So emotional control then is really how you respond to and control your feelings. So there are some strategies we can talk about. Most of these are what we would call external strategies, which means they're things we do physically in order to help ourselves to deal with having emotional control, particularly when under duress. The first thing, of course, is quality sleep. And we know that during sleep is when our brain kind of goes through that clearinghouse process. So it's assimilating new information that you might have learned during the day. It's pruning information that you don't need and getting rid of it. It's reorganizing some constructs in your brain. It's creating memories. And all of that is happening while you sleep. But if you're someone who doesn't have quality sleep and goes through all of the stages deep sleep, REM sleep, light sleep, then chances are your brain isn't having the capacity to deal with the emotional charges it experienced during the day. And regular movement is another great way to keep you emotionally under control. So it doesn't say exercise, as you see, it says movement. So oftentimes people say, oh, we've got to get exercise. And while that's true, sometimes the word exercise is a trigger. And people say, nope, I'm not doing that thing. But movement just means getting up, getting out of your chair. Maybe it's the walk to the refrigerator, walk to get a glass of water, taking the dog out. Maybe it's just a walk to go and take a look at the garden. But it's getting movement of some kind that helps keep that body moving, and it helps create a sense of distraction from any emotional content that you may be thinking about and harboring, which is perpetuating that stress. Now, nutritious food has always been a great habit for the brain. Unfortunately, with where we've been in the last year, some people have picked up some unhealthy eating habits. And so this is a time to really take a look at what are you putting in your body? And is it feeding your brain? So try to make those small changes in your diet to make sure, whether it's adding more greens or fruits or what have you, but that you have a nutritious diet that helps you kind of offset some of that stress. Downtime is really looking at affording yourself some time away from all of the noise. It's time where you disconnect from the work, from your phone, maybe even from the TV. And it's just kind of a quiet time for you. Sometimes people like to read, or they like to look at magazines, or maybe you like to listen to a podcast. But downtime is really just that. It's quieting the brain so that we're not ruminating around stressors or tasks that need to get done. Focus time, on the other hand, is just the opposite. It's where you say, for the next 15 minutes, I am going to get this article done. I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just focused on this task. And when we afford ourselves this time, what we're allowing ourselves to do is to filter out those distractions so our brain is really able to dive in with laser intensity and get the job done. Our social time is just that, being able to engage with families, with friends, whether it's in person, on the phone, through a text message, but it's having that social exchange. It's connecting with one another. It's building those relationships. And I know that has been stressful for us during this last year that's gone by, but it's so important to keep our brains healthy that we and have some kind of social time. And the last one is one that I actually really like. It's called challenge time. And this is when you challenge yourself to do something that might be difficult, that might be uncomfortable, that might be unfamiliar, but you challenge yourself to do something new. So for me, it might be challenging myself to make a new recipe, because I love to cook. Challenging myself right now, I'm taking courses. And so I'm in this very aggressive program because I'm challenging myself to learn more. So challenge can be anything. It could be that marathon you're getting ready for. It could be challenge yourself to get all of the garden weeded before the end of the weekend. But challenge is really there to keep our brain stimulated, and that novelty creates excitement in the brain. So these are some things that we can do to keep our emotional brain intact. All right. So now let's look at this one. Let me know if this sounds like you. Do you frequently procrastinate due to an inability to tolerate either something associated with the task or the frustration of trying to do a task that might be too boring or too tough? Do you impulsively try to fix every situation because you're impatient rather than for just letting it fix itself? Maybe you jump in when a child is trying to do something and, oh, just let me get that for you. Do you exaggerate temporary discomfort? Oh, my pain is off the charts. You have never experienced pain like I have. Do you insist on pursuing immediate gratification? I got to have it now. I don't want to wait 2 days. I want it now. Do you give up immediately when you're presented with a challenge? So you try it and you don't have immediate success. I can't do that anyway. Nah, not doing that. Do you grow irritable or angry when everyday stressors? Ugh, why is this always so hard? Why can't life just be easy? Do you think or insist on things like, I can't stand this with every task that you're asked? Or do you avoid tasks that might, oops, I can't see my screen, sorry, that might cause you distress? Now, I'm not going to try to use that weed whacker again, because every time I do, it always ends up being a problem. I'm not doing it. I'm just not doing it. So, do any of these sound like you? Well, don't worry. If it does, you might just have poor stress tolerance or low frustration tolerance. And so depends on the situation, right? And I see some of you saying, yep, indeed, that's me. Well, stress tolerance is the ability to thrive in a stressful situation and to cope with uncertainty, change, and performance demands. Now let's go back to that poll for just 1 minute. Remember the poll when I asked you about the ages with the most stress? And it came up as 18 to 23-year-olds. Well, if you think about what's going on in their lives, that's when they have so much uncertainty and change that no wonder why they experience so much stress. But sometimes stress gets a bad name. There are some benefits or positive attributes to stress. It is a source of adrenaline. It helps motivate us and it helps us focus. So when you have positive stress, it helps get the job done. But the negative side of stress is that it can lead to anxiety, it can lead to panic attack, all kinds of health concerns. And research has even shown that if you have chronic stress, it can actually change the architectural structure of your brain, particularly in developing children. So let's not always think that stress is negative, because it definitely has its place and it definitely helps keep us safe in the day-to-day. What we have to learn, though, is how do we manage the negative side of stress so it doesn't get to that level that it has so much impact. So the question here is, do adults' brain work the same under stress? Absolutely. Absolutely. And we know from the research that even though I just talked about children's developing brains being changed architecturally, the same thing happens with adults. And we know that through the physiological component of cortisol, it has so many negative effects on the body. Much happens the same with the brain. So as you encounter toxic stress, it also changes the structure of your brain. And so it becomes difficult to recall. It becomes difficult when you're stressed in terms of trying to fight through that fatigue to figure out viable solutions. So this applies to not only the child's developing brain, but also to the adult brain. So as we encounter this stress and toxic stress or chronic stress, let's look at some things we can do. Well, the first thing is to focus on one issue at a time. Oftentimes, we become so overwhelmed with stress that it leads us from one to the next to the next. And all of a sudden there becomes this chain response of one negative response to the next. So instead of thinking, oh my gosh, I'm stuck in traffic, which means I'm going to be late getting home, which means that dinner's going to be late and the kids are going to be hungry. Then I got to get the dog out and the dog's going to be, he's going to be barking because he's hungry. And then, oh my gosh, that my husband comes home and he doesn't have dinner on the table. He's going to be mad and the kids are going to be grumpy. And oh my gosh, it's going to be the worst night ever. But instead of catastrophizing it all together, let's take one thing at a time. All right, I'm stuck in traffic. Well, not much I can do. Let's think how I can prioritize the tasks I'm going to do when I get home so I can be more efficient and effective with getting things done. See the difference? Also, a good tool for you is to take a time out. When you're feeling that stress is building and you're feeling it physiologically and you're feeling it emotionally, take a time out. Whether it's walking away for a moment or whether it's just, listening to a song, something. Take a time out, regroup, take time to breathe, to walk, to move, whatever you need to do. Make time for yourself to reduce that stress so you can begin to access that rational brain again. Another thing to do is to talk positively. Use those statements such as, I can do this. I've done some similar things in the past. I've worked through challenges before. It is not going to get me down. I can do this. And the more you talk positive, the more you believe it, and the more you reduce that stress. So one of the things I learned the other night in this neuroscience class I'm taking at night is that when cortisol builds up in your body, it takes about 20 minutes to dissipate when you're engaged in a positive task. So for instance, if you take that time out and you walk, within 20 minutes, that cortisol starts to dissipate from your brain throughout your body and you're back to homeostasis. When you engage in that positive speaking, all of those things help to get rid of cortisol. Right? So the big picture. So when we talk about seeing the big picture, it's putting it into perspective of, wait a minute, do I really need to stress over this? Is it really going to make that much difference tomorrow or the day after or 2 weeks from now if we had dinner a little bit later tonight? Not really. So what? One night we eat a little bit later. That's all right. We'll get through it. So sometimes just taking a step back and looking at that big picture helps you understand how to get through it. Talk it out. Talk to your friends. Sometimes you need that vent session. Call up someone that you can talk to. Look at your support network. Talk it out. Share it with somebody. Pay attention to those stressors in your body. As you begin to feel those emotions, those sensations, those biological changes, notice them when they're happening and don't let them get out of control. Take action sooner. Evaluate your priorities. So before you decide that something is stressing you out, is this really a priority? Will it be a priority tomorrow? And lastly, avoid being hijacked. We know that when we get stressed, that amygdala is going, uh-oh, and we can't think. And so when we allow our amygdala to hijack our emotions, we become useless in a situation because our emotions have taken control. So as our emotions go up, our rational thought goes down. So at all costs, evaluate what your priorities are. Look for those indicators that you're getting stressed and avoid getting hijacked by it. All right, so let's figure out, there's some quick things you can do to get rid of some of that stress. One are the breathing exercises. One of the ways to quickly dissipate cortisol is by doing a breathing exercise that is 1 second inhale, 2-second exhale, which basically says it's a 1-to-2 ratio. So if you inhale for 2 seconds, you want to exhale for 4. And that ratio helps to dissipate the cortisol throughout your body at a much quicker rate than just doing inhale and exhale, although that is still great. Another thing we can do is called progressive muscle relaxation. We're actually going to do this in just a few minutes, but it's when we actually work on isolating the muscles, tightening them, and relaxing them so that we begin to reduce the stress. So yes, I can repeat the ratio for the breathing. It's 1 inhale to 2 exhale. So for instance, if you inhale for the count of 2, you exhale for the count of 4. So you want to exhale twice as long as you inhale. So instead of being even, it's a 1-to-2 ratio. Aromatherapy is also great. So maybe you light a candle. Maybe you have certain scents. Maybe you have fresh flowers in your home. But that sense of smell triggers happy feelings and senses of within the brain that allows your brain to relax. And I frequently have candles burning in my home as a way of aromatherapy and just kind of keeping that sense of calm. A quick burst of exercise is also a great way to build up those endorphins, get out a little frustration, get a little bit of distraction. And while you're doing that, obviously you can't be thinking about whatever was troubling you. And of course, just have a great big belly laugh. Find something silly. And if you look on the internet, there's always lots of silly things to be had. Just find a moment, let yourself laugh, and release a lot of that stress and tension so that you can go on and reduce some of that stress. So now let's hear from you. What I want you to think about are what are some of the things you do to reduce stress? So go ahead and put them in the chat box. And let's take a look at how you reduce some of the stressors that you have. Walking, yoga, meditation, mini naps, deep breathing, walking, dancing, absolutely. Exercise, knitting, yes, music, long walks with my pup, crocheting, yes, go to your happy place, the beach. Oh, I'd love to be there right about now. Singing, walking, reading, positive self-talk, these are all wonderful things. And each of the yard work, wait a minute, I might need to talk to you. Yard work is one of the things that gets my stress going. But playing games and time with the grandkids, talking with friends, cooking, those are all great ways for you to reduce stress. And much like we talked about is find time to do that. Schedule it so it becomes a priority for you. I like that. Girl time, absolutely. Connecting, venting, sharing. Those are all great ways to help you to reduce that stress. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take just a few minutes and we're going to do a progressive muscle relaxation exercise. We're not going to do the whole thing. And some of you may think, oh, I don't like any of that yoga and the meditation or whatever. This is a little bit different. Give yourself a try. If you want to turn off your camera to do this, you're welcome to do that. But we're going to spend about 2.5 minutes engaging in a progressive muscle relaxation session. All right, let's get started.
Sit back or lie down in a comfortable position. Shut your eyes if you're comfortable doing so. Begin by taking a deep breath and noticing the feeling of air filling your lungs. Hold your breath for a few seconds. Release the breath slowly and let the tension leave your body. Take in another deep breath and hold it. Again, slowly release the air. Even slower now, take another breath. Fill your lungs and hold the air. Slowly release the breath and imagine the feeling of tension leaving your body. Continue breathing slowly throughout this exercise. Try to focus on the feeling of air filling and leaving your lungs. It will be normal for your mind to wander. When it does, do your best to bring it back to the moment. Now, move your attention to your feet. Begin to tense your feet by curling your toes in the arch of your foot. Hold on to the tension and notice what it feels like. Release the tension in your foot. Notice the new feeling of relaxation. Next, begin to focus on your lower leg. Tense the muscles in your calves. Hold them tightly and pay attention to the feeling of tension. Release the tension from your lower legs. Again, notice the feeling of relaxation. Remember to continue taking deep breaths. Next, tense the muscles of your upper leg and pelvis. You can do this by tightly squeezing your thighs together. Make sure you feel tenseness without going to the point of strain. And release. Feel the tension leave your muscles. Begin to tense your stomach and chest. You can do this by sucking your stomach in. Squeeze harder and hold the tension. Release the tension. Allow your body to go limp. Let yourself notice the feeling of relaxation. Continue taking deep breaths. Breathe in slowly, noticing the air fill your lungs, and hold it. Release the air slowly. Feel it leaving your lungs. Next, tense the
All right, so that was just kind of a sample of progressive muscle relaxation, very similar to meditation and mindfulness in terms of really working on quieting your mind and finding a way to really concentrate on your muscles and then relaxing them. And again, as you're doing that, you're not focused on the stressors or the emotional challenges that you may be facing, but you're really focused on the wellness and the calmness within your body. So there are lots of those on YouTube. If you enjoyed it, feel free to take a look at it. It is something that even you can teach your children to use. It's something that it can be used in the classrooms at home, etc. So we're going to turn our attention right now to negativity bias. And what research says is that as you go through the world, we tend to view the world through a negative lens. And we focus more on the negative as we're trying to make sense of our world. So when we think about it, why would we try to focus on the negative instead of the positive? Well, what we know from research is that when you dwell on the negative, you're really working on keeping your body and your brain safe. So when you think about like the hunters and the gatherers, they spend all of their time looking for the negative in their environment to make sure that they weren't going to be attacked. And so they began to understand their environment and their world by understanding safety. So not only does this negative stimuli trigger the neural activity in our brain, but it's also detected much more easily and quickly than the positive. So the amygdala, remember that piece that motivates that stimuli of it uses about 2/3 of the neurons to detect bad news. So the majority of what's going on with that amygdala and the stimuli is about really looking for and concentrating on the negative so we can keep ourselves safe. So now I'm going to take us away a little bit from some of the strategies that we talked about and really look at a strategy that involves a cognitive change. So a change in thinking. And the way that we want to look at this is through this idea of reappraisal. So when I talk about reappraisal, what I'm asking you to think about is we're going to be accessing a different neural network in our brain. And we're going to think about that attentional deployment. So instead of paying attention to a negative, we're going to shift our attention to the positive. We're going to reappraise a situation. We're going to increase that prefrontal activity. We're going to decrease that activity in the amygdala so that we have less negative affect. And so what we've learned through the neuroscience research is that the cognitive reappraisal is one of the most effective ways at regulating your emotion. And it does take practice. So let's look at it a little bit more. There are 3 ways that you can reappraise a situation. The first is how you reinterpret your emotional stimulus. So as you get a stimuli that evokes fear, one of the first things you have to do is decide, oh, is this emotional stimulus something that I can manage, partially manage, or I don't have a clue as what to do with this? You can also reinterpret your perspective. So instead of being emotionally attached, you can detach yourself and try to take an objective view of the same situation. And then the third way we can do it is by having a non-judgmental view of the emotion. We can change our mindset. So it's kind of like we look at a situation and we are going to disconnect the emotion, put it on the shelf until we can think of a rational way to solve this problem or deal with this emotion. So those are 3 different ways our brain can help us figure out how we should best respond in a positive way. So when we reinterpret an emotional stimuli, we want to move it from a negative response to a more positive outcome. So let's think about that. Here we are, we're stuck in our car. The negative event is we're stuck in traffic. And our immediate negative response is all of that chaos. I'm going to be late. Dinner's not going to be late. Dinner's not going to be ready. The children are going to be grumpy. Husband's going to be mad. Dinner's not on the table. Chaos is going to ensue. But instead, we could think of it differently and say, well, all right, so stuck in traffic, not much I can do about that. Let's see. What could I make for dinner that's going to take less time? How can I prioritize? Maybe I could ask the children to help out. Maybe I could even call home and ask them to set the table. So I start thinking about a better outcome. Instead of dwelling on the negative, I've moved into a positive affect to think about how I can change my thinking about the situation. So when I interpret it in a less negative way, I'm always looking to find a good in the situation. And in this case, I might think, hey, the kids may actually feel good about helping out. They may grumble at first, but when they feel like, hey, I can set the table, I can help out, what a great support I was to mom, it may actually be a good lesson for everyone. So typically we have 2 general coping styles. You are either someone who accepts or avoids the negative internal experiences. And when I'm talking about an internal experience, what I'm talking about are your thoughts, your feelings, your sensations, and your memories. So when you have a negative thought, do you accept it or do you avoid it? When you have a negative emotion or feeling, do you just say, oh, that's stupid, I shouldn't feel that way? Or do you say, yeah, it really does hurt? So let's take a look at what's the difference between accepting and avoiding as an emotional coping style. So if you are an avoidant, you are typically unwilling to remain in contact with distressing thoughts, whether it be a feeling, memory, whatever. Because even if it creates harm in the long run, you're not going to connect to it. So for instance, if you are experiencing frustration and you said, I don't care, I'm just going to keep doing it, I'm just going to keep doing it, and you're doing the task, whatever it is, and you're so frustrated, it's making it worse. So people who tend to have that avoidance of, I'm not going to let that get in my way, I'm not going to deal with that, oftentimes makes you more vulnerable to stress. It can moderate more health issues. You tend to be someone who catastrophizes things. Emotions don't make sense to you. You don't have time for that emotional thing. You just got to get it done. It doesn't matter how you get it done, you're just going to get it done. And you tend to have a negative view that things are out of control. And it would be shameful for you to say, I'm frustrated right now, I need to take a break. Or your attempts at controlling it are things like suppression, elimination, drugs, and alcohol. So that's if you're of the avoidance. Now, if you're on the acceptance side, you tend to adopt a non-judgmental view of emotion, which means that you recognize that emotions are just activities of the brain. It's the feelings you put to an emotion that make the difference. So emotions motivate us to act. And it's the feelings that you as an individual attach to that emotion, which is the activity in the brain that makes you act. So people that accept this, recognize that emotion, typically do things to manage it. They might do a mindfulness activity. They could practice anytime gratitude, which basically says they're grateful for something at the moment. So when they begin to feel stress or an emotion that they're uncomfortable with, they find a way to find something that they're grateful for in that moment. They do mindfulness activities anytime during the day. It's not something that we do Tuesday evenings from 7 to 8. And then there's the if-then rule. And this is one of my favorites. This is kind of the person who has a plan A, plan B. So it's giving forethought to situations. If this happens, then I'm going to do this. So there's this acceptance that says, you know what, things go wrong in life. Things are tough. So I'm going to prepare myself mentally to deal with what could happen. So if I get stuck in traffic, I have a plan B of how I'm going to manage the situation. And the if-then rule helps us to step outside of that emotion and be non-judgmental and deal with the act of solving the activity or creating a positive outcome from any situation. So a couple of things to think about when you're trying to reinterpret your emotional stimulus. One is, what's the presenting problem? What triggered that problem? And what's perpetuating it? So whenever you have an emotional stimuli, you're getting anxious. So the first thing is, why am I getting anxious? What's causing me to feel anxious right now? What triggered this? And what's keeping it going? So there's 3 ways you can check in with yourself to figure out how do you reframe and reinterpret that emotional stimuli to get you out of the negative into the positive. So a couple of resources I have for you. One is an emotional coping style scale. And what the scale does is it helps you to kind of figure out where you fall. Are you more of an avoidance coping style or an acceptance coping style? And it asks you questions that help you think about sometimes, maybe, I don't ever do that. This is just kind of a great way for you to just kind of fine tune a little bit what's your natural bent in terms of your coping style. Another resource for you are some reappraisal questions that if you're trying to get out of a particular mindset around your thinking, this is a great way of helping to shift it. So for instance, how could you be thinking about this or that situation differently? So it's a great way to kind of stop you in your track. Your brain is now scanning and searching for answers, and it's letting go of that negative perspective or that negative judgment that you had and looking for answers of, how could I do this differently? So these are just some great questions to help you as you try to gain emotional control by using your cognitive resources of reappraisal. And those will be available for you on the website. So this last area I want us to take a look at is that oftentimes when we think about executive functions, we're talking about completing a task. However, it also relates to how do you regulate those emotions and the behavior that follows. So what research says is that children with autism, as well as children with related developmental disabilities, often struggle with challenging behaviors that are a result of deficits in their executive function skills. So I have a question for you then. Is behavior then a choice? So a child's ability to succeed is based on them being able to A, understand what's being asked of them, and then being able to regulate their behavior so they can do whatever you've asked them to do. When a child's executive functions are working smoothly and the expectation is developmentally appropriate, they can flexibly think about how to perform a task or how to acquire some new information. One of the things that frequently happens is that executive function gets in the way. And so a child gets stuck and not able to execute. So when a child has difficulty with either a delayed or impaired executive function, they're going to fail, they're going to misinterpret our message, they're not going to hear our message, and they're not going to do what we ask them to do. And instead, what we may do is trigger that amygdala, that that leads them into the fight or flight response. So I ask you to think about when this misbehavior occurs, what's your response? Adults typically try to respond by correcting the behavior, which then oftentimes leads to a power struggle. And then that relationship becomes disconnected. But instead of using an opportunity such as non-compliance as a way to punish a child, let's flip that switch and use it as an opportunity to build the relationship. Try to figure out what's motivating or getting in the way from that child doing what you ask them to do. So by understanding their behavior, you're building this sense of empathy and connection to the child. And it's leading for opportunities for the two of you to start constructively problem solving what's getting in the way from them doing what you ask them to do. Sometimes we just need a new perspective. By altering our perception, it helps us to have a more positive mindset. So one of my favorite theories in life is this: kids do well if they can. Well, the opposite of that is kids do well if they want to. And society believes that if a child wanted to do the right thing, the child would do the right thing. And I beg to differ with you. What I say is that if a kid could do the right thing, they would. And your explanation of the child's behavior guides your intervention. So if you think the child is trying to manipulate you and be non-compliant or pluck your nerves, whatever it is, you're going to try to control them, punish them, change the behavior in a way that may be more demeaning as opposed to skill building. But if your intervention says, wait a minute, I'm not sure what that behavior is telling me. Something's getting in the way of them being able to do what I want them to do. What is it? Now I have an opportunity to engage in problem solve and really help that child build skills. So let's take a look at what Ross Greene says. He says that it's much like having a learning disability. So for instance, if a child has difficulty learning math and you say 2 + 2 is, the child says 5. And you say, no, 2 + 2 is, the child says 5. No, let's try this again. 2 + 2 is 5. Go to the office. We wouldn't do that. We would find another way. So what he says is that students lack these crucial cognitive skills that are essential for handling frustration, the demands of flexibility and adaptability, and that when they need them the most, they can't access them. The amygdala is stimulating to the point where they're afraid or not able to access that frontal lobe. So think about that the next time a child doesn't do what you ask. All right, now it's time to put our work to. We have been talking about executive function now for the last 4 months. These are the ones that are the key components of executive function: response inhibition, working memory, emotional control, task initiation, sustained attention, planning, prioritizing, organization, time management, flexibility, metacognition, goal-directed persistence, and stress tolerance. All right. Now, when you ask a child to start their homework or a project, let's take a look at which executive functions come into play. Well, one of them is task initiation. Child may have difficulty getting started on their homework. A child may have difficulty planning and prioritizing. Well, I got 4 assignments to do. I only have 2 hours tonight. How am I going to get this done? They may have poor organization strategies. I don't know where my papers are, my books, I don't know where to put things. I don't know how to organize. They may have poor time management. And each of these executive functions plays a vital role in us having a positive outcome, which is completed homework. So by just saying the child is lazy doesn't solve the problem. Now let's have you give me a little bit of help with this one. So in the chat box, we want the child to clean their room. Which executive functions might we need if we want the child to clean their room? Which ones do you think are going to come into play here? Goal-directed persistence, absolutely. Task initiation, perfect. What else might we have? Time management, yes. Planning, prioritizing, yes. Sustained attention, right. Keep focused until you get it done. So do you see how for any given child, when you tell them to clean their room and it's not done, instead of saying, oh, you're just trying to get out of it, you're being lazy, what we really need to think about is, what part of this didn't they get? What did they need help with? All right, this is your turn. Decluttering your home and cleaning your garage. Which ones of these do you need? Which executive function skills are going to help you to get it done. And so we have someone that says all of them. Well, for some of you, yes. So it might be initiating the task if it's too much. It might be emotional control if, oh, I love that shirt. I'll never wear it again because it's 3 sizes too small, but I love it. Think so as you look at these tasks, keep in mind every time a child or a significant other is unable to perform the task you ask, think about what executive function might be getting in the way. And then what are the strategies we can use to help them get over that? So before you label the behavior, lazy, non-compliant, oppositional, think about which executive function, what's the reason that that behavior is exhibiting, and then what's the skill they need to be able to get it done. And then lastly, may you have the courage this week to begin breaking patterns in your life that no longer serve you. Give yourself permission to pause and reflect today, and remember, taking care of yourself doesn't mean me first. It means me too. So thank you for joining me this evening. Hopefully you found some tips on how best to help manage your stress and have some emotional control, particularly under some very difficult situations. This website will be available for you at thechildrensguild.org. So you'll have an opportunity to download the presentation and the slides. The handout resources that I talked about will be available also on the website. So by all means, take a look there. And I want to thank each and every one of you for participating, particularly in this series on executive function. It was great to be able to build this with you and to have all of your contributions and participation. So I thank you. I know we ran over tonight, just a lot of information, probably because I love this topic. So thank you all. It's been great being with you. Have a great evening.
Sunset, bills on the mindset, I can't deny it. Getting higher than my income's breadcrumbs. I've been trying to survive. The glow that the sun gets right around sunset helps me realize this is just a journey. Drop your worries, you are gonna turn out fine. Oh, you turn out fine. Oh, you turn out fine. But you gotta keep your head up, and you can let your head down. Hey, you gotta keep your head up, and you can let your head down. Hey, I know it's hard, it's hard to remember sometimes. But you gotta keep your head up, and you can let your head down. I got my hands in my pockets, kicking these rocks. It's kinda hard to watch this life go by. I'm buying into skeptics mess with the confidence in my eyes. I've seen all the angles, thoughts get tangled. I start to compromise my life and my purpose. Is it all worth it? Am I gonna turn out fine? Oh, you turn out fine. Oh, you turn out fine. But you gotta keep your head up, and you can let your head down. You gotta keep your head up, and you can let your head down. I know it's hard, it's hard to remember sometimes, but you gotta keep your head up, and you can let your head down. Rainbow after rain, the sun will always come again, and it's a circling around again. It comes around again. I say only rain. sun will always come again. It's so